Films in Focus with David Sterritt is underwritten by the Moviehouse, your destination for first-run Hollywood and independent movies, and a digital portal to the Met Opera, National Theater Live, and special events worldwide in Millerton, New York, and on the web, themoviehouse.net.
David Sterritt is the editor-in-chief of the Quarterly Review of Film and Video, contributing writer at Cineast, film professor at the Maryland Institute College of Art, Robin Hood Radio's very own critic and guide to all things cinematic. He joins us weekly. The films are not. The topic is virtual cinema, which I've always wanted to say. It has it has a certain ring to, virtual cinema. That's actually a good entry to what it will probably end up being a fairly wide topic.
Well, it is a fairly wide topic, but it is actually, at this moment, of course, prompted by the fact that the actual cinemas, the brick-and-mortar movie theaters, are mainly shut down. And that is certainly true in the United States, and it is true, I guess, in most parts of the world. And what's kind of interesting, there are exceptions to this, and this mainly has to do with drive-ins. Where one can sit in one's own car. Some of those are going on. And interestingly, recently, the governor of Texas included movie theaters in the first phase of the stage-by-stage reopening there. And so what this meant was that in Texas, if one chose to go to the movies, added to the movie-going experience were new measures such as widely spaced seating, cashiers sitting behind plexiglass shields, people greeting ticket buyers in the lobby to ask if they had symptoms of anything, and that kind of thing. But, even with all of that, limited numbers of people decided that seeing a real movie on a real movie screen outweighed the risks of sitting in an enclosed environment with a whole bunch of strangers. So that's the Texas experiment. Now, it's kind of interesting in other parts of the world, and I know we keep comparing ourselves with other countries, but things have been done a little bit differently. I'm thinking of Sweden particularly. Sweden did allow movie theaters to remain open, I think, pretty much throughout the whole thing, with guidelines, so that no more than 50 people would be allowed into a theater and that sort of thing. And this was controversial even within Scandinavia. Sweden actually has had a much higher death rate from COVID-19 than other countries like Finland, Denmark, and Norway. And they have, sure enough, they have stricter lockdown requirements overall. So keeping theaters open in Sweden has been controversial along with other things. But, there too, there's been experimenting. For example, there's a very large theater chain which started offering a cinema on demand in movie theaters. Apparently you could go to a movie theater, I guess, with your friends or something, and ask for a particular movie to be shown. And again, experiments have been going on in various ways. Then to talk about things that have not been happening, all kinds of important film festivals have been shut down or postponed. The Cannes Film Festival, which normally takes place around this time of year, did not happen this year, has not happened this year. And that's important even for people who don't go to film festivals, because that's where a whole lot of movies get launched. So a lot of movies are not being launched in the usual way. And that will probably have repercussions down the road as movies that we would normally be reading about if we're interested in film from film festivals are not having that kind of advance notice. Now, for my money, one of the most interesting things that has happened is that there has been this growth of what's been called virtual cinema. And this has been a very interesting response, which I was not initially expecting, but an interesting response to the shutting down of movie theaters. So, of course, there's movie production is the making of movies, but there's two other hugely important steps in the world of film, and that is distribution and exhibition. And exhibition is what has really been shut down because of the movie theaters being closed, and distribution, which is simply getting the movies from the people who make them to the people who show them. Distributors have been sort of caught right in the middle of all this. Okay, a lot of movies have already been made. Production on a lot of movies that was going on when the shutdown happened has, of course, been suspended. But a lot of movies have already been made, and the distributors have been wanting to get them into movie theaters, but movie theaters have been closed. So one of the, again, very interesting responses to this has been this starting of what's often called nowadays virtual cinema. Some distributors, a very important one, for example, is Sony Pictures Classics, which specializes in indie movies and international movies and so forth. They announced right away, we are simply going to wait for theaters to reopen. And I thought, well, that's that. We're probably going to have to wait a long time before there's any new movies. But other distributors did very different things, one of them being, for example, Universal Pictures, one of the big Hollywood studios, which is also an enormously important route for movies to get into theaters. And they immediately put really important movies which had opened in theaters. The Invisible Man was one. Emma was another. Put them right away into video on demand, virtual cinema. So that was a very interesting response, and there were a lot of movies that one could then get by streaming in one's own home, and the prices for streaming these movies has tended to be roughly what one would pay going to a movie theater, maybe a little bit more, but then again, you can maybe get your family members, the people you've been sheltering in place with, several people seeing a movie for one streaming rental fee. So again, it's been very, very interesting. Now, this has another ramification, however, because normally movies don't get shown in any sort of home format like streaming or that sort of thing until they've had a certain window to be in the movie theaters exclusively. So you have huge movie chains which are now closed, but they normally demand that they have, it's usually 3 months, that's the customary amount, 3 months of having theatrical exclusivity. So that, in other words, if people want to see some new hot movie that's just coming out, they have to go to a movie theater, and the movie theaters, the chains, have generally demanded 90 days, 3 months of that. But now, again, the movie theaters are closed. So that has sort of bollocks things up. And it remains to be seen now what's going to be happening down the road with all of that. Now, of course, there's also a big difference between kinds of movies. The kinds of films that are like the indie movies, the international movies, the films that tend to have a slightly smaller profiles, they have been going more into video on demand. What has been going less into video on demand have been what's called tentpole pictures, the great big huge super productions that really want to be seen by huge masses of people on huge wide screens. So those movies have been have really been put off and have not been, we're still having to wait for those, and nobody is clear just how much longer we're going to have to wait. Now, it's kind of interesting if you really take the long view of this. Yes, movie theaters are closed, and a lot of movies, not all movies, but a lot of movies that had just opened just before the shutdown or that had not yet opened have been available now on demand through various kinds of streaming services. If one takes the long view, this is really sort of just the latest step in a long, long erosion of what was once the great dominance of movie theaters. If you go back to the 20s and 30s and 40s, anybody who wanted to see a movie of any kind had to go to a movie theater. And then that all started to change around the 1950s when the big studios sold their films, started selling their films to television networks. So now people could see movies on television. It wasn't the same as seeing them in a theater, especially back in the 50s when television was black and white and screens were little square things. So it wasn't the same as going to see a movie in a theater. But still, you could now see movies on television. And then you had the advent of cable television and pay-per-view. And then you had the rise of video cassettes and DVDs and now Blu-rays, and now we have all kinds of high-resolution streaming services, and a lot of people have flat-screen TVs, so that when you see a movie now, you can see it sort of very well in your own home if you are properly equipped, which a lot of people are. So of course, not even the finest home theater setup is going to be the same as the fabled thrill of watching a big screen spectacle on a genuinely big screen in a jam-packed auditorium. But still, even a relatively modest home theater setup gives people the opportunity to enjoy the show. You can see the movie without having to worry about people talking in the row behind you or taking phone calls or going to and from the popcorn counter and all that sort of thing. So I personally like looking at movies on my own living room setup. I have absolutely no problem with that whatever. On top of that, by the way, most movie theaters now rely on digital projection, which is not altogether different from the digital stuff that we see on our plasma screens. So it's very, very interesting how all of this is sort of playing out. And so we're just going to see what's going to be happening down the line. I want to mention right now, just before we wrap this up, that the reopening of movie theaters is going to be probably a fairly slow process. It has already started, and it is mainly drive-ins. There are about 350 drive-ins which are open around the United States, and right now they are definitely doing they're doing the most business. The few theaters that may be trying to open up in America are not doing the kind of business that the drive-ins are doing. So that's one thing which is happening right now.
And just to interject, David, apparently, what is that big company, AMC? It's just trying to figure out what to do. They're coming out next week, but they have. They're running it at like a $1 billion loss. It was just announced today, and they're trying to figure out how to survive. I just want to throw that in there.
They were in trouble before the current horrors.
Okay, but that's relevant, and because so many. People definitely have to pay attention to people who were in trouble prior to, because there will be a lot of claims that, oh my God, the pandemic, some of which are absolutely legit and some of which are, oh, this is convenient. So.
Oh, yeah. No, you are absolutely right about that. Dead right. There's a couple of theaters that have been theater chains which have been in trouble since before all this happened. And whether they are going to be able to stay in business at all remains to be seen. AMC is probably at the top of that list, but it's not unique in that respect. And my gosh, the smaller theaters, the theaters that I go to probably more often than multiplexes, the theaters that specialize in the indie movies and the overseas movies and that sort of thing. I'm not sure that a lot of them are going to be opening their doors at all. Now, here's the bright side of that, and this relates back to what I was talking about before, is that there's a couple of ways that people have been accessing virtual cinema. One way is that certain distributors, especially more indie distributors, I'm thinking of Kim Stim, for example, also Kino Lorber, outfits like this have set up their own websites or their website pages for the streaming of movies, and a lot of movie theaters have done the same thing. And I've mentioned this in some of our recent episodes. I have been streaming movies through the Moviehouse in Millerton, New York. I've been streaming movies through the Parkway Cinema here in Baltimore. I've been streaming movies through a couple of places in New York, where I also go a lot when times are normal. Film at Lincoln Center and Film Forum. And there have been some terrific movies that have been available through these various different platforms. And that is benefiting those theaters and those operations. So the Moviehouse and the Parkway, I'm sure they all wish that they were wide open right now, but they are not totally devoid of any kind of income during this time. And even a for-profit theater near where I am based has recently finally started streaming movies as well. So again, it's not the same as collecting tickets on a Saturday night from huge crowds of people, but there's a nice little steady flow of income from this. Now, one thing that I got to say here is that I am really hoping that this whole subject of today's episode, virtual cinema, this idea of streaming new movies directly into your home through your computer, through your smart Blu-ray player, whatever it may be, will keep up as sort of an ancillary, as a supplement once traditional movie theaters are open again for their traditional kinds of business. I think it's a marvelous thing, and I really, really hope it happens. Every year in Baltimore, there's a Baltimore Film Festival around this time of year. That's going to be online, and that's happening with other places that normally would be putting movies out onto big screens, and I really hope that this sort of thing continues. So I am really looking forward to my own local movie theaters being open and the movie theaters that I sometimes go to elsewhere being open. But I'm also hoping that once all this settles down and once this whole virus business is nothing but an unpleasant memory, I'm hoping that this virtual cinema stuff keeps up. Because for one thing, a lot of people don't live anywhere near a theater that's going to show, for example, a really interesting movie from Poland or a really interesting movie from some brand new talent somewhere in Middle America. A lot of people don't live near the theaters that are going to show those, and instead of waiting for ages and ages and ages for these things to come out in home video, I say let them come out right away. Let virtual cinema continue to thrive at that wonderful time when traditional movie theaters are open again for business. So that's my virtual story this week, Jill.
Virtual story from virtual cinema, and this is our virtual show, and thank you very much, David Sterritt. Film was in focus.